Welcome back to another episode of Life in the Sands podcast. We have Jake and Zach on the podcast today, and we're really excited to talk about some of the upcoming trade rumors. The trade deadline in the NBA is fast approaching, so we each have a couple of quick take style trade ideas that we're going to run through. We each have four trade ideas, and then if there's time near the end, we'll also talk about some of the NFL games that have already happened this weekend. The Chiefs obviously beating Miami in a game that I believe should have been postponed as well. And then in the first game of the day, it wasn't really close. The Browns got toppled. The Texans rolled at home to a big win there. So let's jump right into some of these trade ideas, though, Bender. I'm going to let you go first and bring a trade to the table as well. We each have four. We're going to kind of bring the trade to the table. We're going to give some room for rebuttal, have a little conversation about it before we move on to the next one. Hopefully, we'll have some interesting ideas come out of this and some future discussion ideas. So, Bender, without further ado.
Yeah, so I do have some big name trades in here, but I'm going to start with one that's not exactly like that. I feel like it's more of an underrated player in the league. Um, I have Norman Powell going to the Dallas Mavericks, and the Clippers in exchange would receive Maxi Kleber, Seth Curry, plus any kind of pick compensation. I just feel like Norman Powell coming off the bench along with Tim Hardaway and Hardy on their bench would work out very well. And doing that, you don't have to get rid of Grant Williams. You don't have to get rid of Lively. Like you don't have to get rid of any of those guys. Um, I feel like the Clippers are a deep team. They can kind of fill that void as needed. Bones Highland is a player that hasn't gotten time much this year. I think he could step into that role and play side by side with like Terrence Mann or whoever, Russell Westbrook. They did it last year. I don't see a reason why they can't this year. And I feel like Norman Powell being on the Dallas Mavericks would just give them an extra edge because he plays defense as well. Um, and that's a very big need for the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, this is an interesting trade. I do like the idea of Norman Powell going to the Mavericks. What was it was Seth Curry and who else did you say was going to
Maxi Kleber, stretch
Maxi
four.
Cleveland? Yes, I mean I like that for the Clippers too, right? I think about Zubac being there, um, but then I try to think about the other big guys in their roster. I mean, what other forwards do they have that are really prominent right now?
Talking about the Clippers.
Yeah,
Yeah, they don't really have a lot of wing depth. They have a lot of guard play. Their wing depth comes from Kawhi and Paul George, so I think adding him would just be a benefit. Daniel
yeah,
Tice is their backup center, but again, they have guards and wings. So
right. And if you're gonna play a lineup with all of those guys, especially a guy like James Harden, that stretch four, stretch wing that can also help you with rebounding a little bit. I think that fits with the Clippers really well. And then adding Seth Curry to a team is always a good idea. Whether he gets minutes or not, you're always going to be able to bring him off the bench and have elite shooting. So I like that trade for both teams. I can see why that could make sense for both teams. Obviously Norman Powell is a big piece of what the Clippers are trying to do right now too. So it'd be interesting to see what the picks and other consideration might end up being in a trade like that. But overall, I think it makes sense, and um, definitely would help the Mavericks. Definitely help the Mavericks because a
for
couple of these
sure.
guys aren't even getting time. So I think that makes sense. All right, I'm gonna move on to sort of my first trade. I'm gonna kind of keep it in the same line of Bender. Um, I'm not gonna. I have a couple of three-team trades. I'm not gonna jump to that right away. I'm gonna do a trade between the Jazz and the Thunder first. I'd like to see John Collins go to the Thunder. So I'm going to say John Collins is going to the Thunder, plus probably like a pick or two. And the Thunder will send back Bertans, Mitchich, and Jang to the Jazz. The Jazz love their foreign players and their young guys and stuff, so I don't think they would mind. I don't think they would mind picking up a couple of young guys, a couple of foreign players, and everything. And then Bertans actually is, makes it easier on the contract situation. Bertans is making like 18 or 19 million or something this year, whereas
Yeah.
John Collins is in like the low 20s or 26, I think. So,
hmm
I mean, in terms of like contracts and everything, I think that's why this trade works out. You bring in a player in John Collins, it's probably going to have more of an impact than any of those three guys on a team like the Thunder, who's trying to really make a difference this year. And then you send probably some younger guys and some foreign guys back to the Jazz to just keep looking at rebuilding that core and seeing who's going to fit in there for the future and who's not.
For sure. And the thing is, John Collins fits like the young, up and coming theme of their rebuild. I also think it's a good pairing next to Chet. So I just think that overall works out. And I think that would actually leave some picks to be used to go elsewhere with it as well. Like if they wanted to package like Giddy and Lou Dort and all those picks for a superstar, I think they could. Um, and then if you think about that, the trio that you just said between SGA, Chet, and John Collins, if you get a fourth player in there, and they already have depth with like J Dub and Isaiah
Right.
Joe shooting off the bench, all those guys. So I think you could see them making a move even bigger than John Collins here in the future.
I think so too. I think they can make a move bigger than John Collins. I think they could do something like John Collins, and they could potentially even do like a bigger superstar style trade, solely because of the horde of picks that they have. Right, like they have half of the league's picks for the next 3 years.
For sure. Yeah. So I think that would be good for the Thunder, who are already exceeding expectations.
Right, it would
But
move up their timeline a little bit, I think. But
for sure. Um, let's go with a big name now. Let's go with Zach LaVine. Um, his trade talks have been floating around for I don't know, probably since the beginning of the season.
yeah, on the market
Um,
for a while.
yeah, and him being disgruntled and coming off the bench for a little bit. I don't know what's going on in Chicago. I feel like that needs to be talked about a little bit more as well. Um,
And is Lonzo going
I,
to start playing soon?
I don't know, man. I kind of feel bad for him. I'm glad that he's making progress, but we'll kind of see if he ever makes it back. I kind of want him to, but just I don't know. Let's move on. I have Zach LaVine to the Kings. This has been talked about just because Zach LaVine in free agency was in talks about signing with the Kings in previous years. Um, so it's definitely a destination that he wants, and he told the front office that as well. So I think the Kings should make it work. I don't think the team that the Kings have currently are good enough to win an NBA title. Um, so I think adding Levine would help. In exchange, going to the Bulls would be Harrison Barnes, Malik Monk, and Vezenkov. So you are losing Malik Monk, which is your bench scoring. So I think they'll need to make some extra additions. But Harrison Barnes hasn't really played as well this year. And I think stepping into a Zach LaVine situation with De'Aaron Fox, Sabonis, and even Keegan Murray's been showing up this year as well. Happy about how his progress is going. But I don't know. I just feel like this works out for all teams. Malik Monk going to the Bulls, um, scoring. They always like scoring. Anybody to stretch the floor for a guy like DeMar DeRozan, who's mid-range and in. Um, Now, I don't know if the Bulls would keep Harrison Barnes in this just because he is a veteran player. Um, I could see him getting traded right after, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think this is a good suggestion for sure. I know that Zach Levine's name has been floated around a ton, right? So, I mean, any trade involving Zach Levine at this point is something that could happen probably. I'm just one of those people that I don't know if he impacts winning enough. So if I'm a team like Sacramento, where I agree they probably don't have enough to win it all right now, they probably have enough to make another run into the second or third round. Um, but if I'm looking at players that put me over the edge to win a championship, I don't know if I'm looking at Zach Levine as that guy if I'm Sacramento. Because I also don't know if he's that different in what he does compared to who I have in Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox. I would have been much more inclined to bring in a guy like Ananobi. I think I obviously know he's off the market now, but I think
Yeah,
a guy like Ananobi or even maybe Siakam would be a much better fit in Sacramento than Levine potentially. I think they would bring something that's would make them more of an actual trio versus just a bunch of scorers. Sabonis is a lot more than that. De'Aaron Fox is a lot more than that, but defensively and other aspects of the game. Um, and we've always had this conversation. You've always seen a little bit more in Zach Levine than I have. I think we've always been on kind of opposite sides of the coin there. It'd be interesting though either way. And I don't disagree that Monk and the other considerations going back to the Bulls would be interesting with DeRozan either. I think that's probably a better fit as well because Monk is probably more comfy with the ball out of his hands than Levine is.
for sure. Something I like that you said was that I think Siakam might be a better fit in Sacramento than Levine. However, I think Siakam will end up somewhere else, and we'll get into that eventually. Um, and if you follow our Twitter, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But um, but no, I think Levine just having star power, and I mentioned this in the past podcast already. Having star power going into the playoffs helps. Can't hurt you because you know Zach Levine any given moment can get you 30 plus. You know what Sabonis can bring to the table. He's always flirting with a triple double and being the stat sheet guy. De'Aaron Fox continues to get better. Um,
Right,
the only thing
right.
I worry about is what you get rid of to get Siakam if you do that. I know the asking price for Levine would be a little bit lower just because nobody else wants him at the moment. Um, so it's all about asking price and what kind of depth you're willing to get rid of. Always, that's how it works when you trade for any kind of superstar. But yeah, I think it would work out for both teams regardless. But I guess we'll see if he ends up there.
It'll be interesting. It's interesting you brought up the Siakam news as well. We'll talk more about that much later, I'm sure. It's also interesting. I still feel like the NBA trade market is kind of rebounding after what happened with Gobert and KD,
This is true.
because I feel
Yeah,
like that like reset values, and owners and GMs were like, hang on here, like this is about to get ridiculous, and
yeah,
you're seeing a little bit of a reset of that market too. And I think the value of players and picks and those kind of things is also being reshaped in front of our eyes a little bit. And when we look back at like these last this last year or two and the next year or two, I think we're gonna look back at this time period and say, wow, like that like changed the way trades happen, like changed, really changed the landscape of how things were considered. Moving on
yeah.
to my next trade, though, I'm going to jump into my other two-team trade, and then I'll do my other three-team trades. I have Terry Rozier and JT Thor going to the Heat for Caleb Martin and Duncan Robinson, going back to the Hornets. So Caleb Martin, his brother, is on the Hornets still. So you reunite him with his brother, and you bring more shooting to the LaMelo Ball Hornets. And then on top of that, you bring Terry Rozier and JT Thor back to the Heat. The Heat have a way with young athletic forwards like JT Thor and just turning them into prototype 3-and-D style wings. And I think you get a refresh at the point guard position from a guy like Kyle Lowry, who's just not going to win a championship with the Heat at this point, being, the point guard. You bring Terry Rozier in, who I think can fit that Heat culture, that scrappiness a little bit as well. So um, I think, yeah, this is a really interesting one. I'd be interested to see your thoughts, Bender. But yeah, Terry Rozier going to the Heat with JT Thor, and then Caleb Martin and Duncan Robinson both going back to the Hornets.
See, I find that interesting. So, if you looked into the playoffs last year, the Heat struggled to score. Half of that was Tyler Hero being out, and hopefully you see him in the playoffs this year. Um, However, you're getting rid of your two sharpshooters from the playoffs from last year in that trade. Um, they do have a lot of young guys. They do have hidden depth that nobody really knows about on that team. So I think they have no problem finding anybody to fill in those roles. But I think Hawkes Jr. would have no problem filling in the Martin role on that. Lowry would get sent to the bench. Um, Rozier has the playoff experience with the Celtics from years ago, if you think about it that way as well. So if you think about the needs of the Heat, I think adding the extra scoring and Terry Rozier plays defense as well, that fits their culture. Um, I just feel like he's one of those dogs that nobody talks about. So he's just been hidden on Charlotte's team for a long time. Um, I think he was a part of the Gordon Hayward trade a long time ago with the Celtics as well. Um, but no, I think it's a good trade. I'm kind of curious if that trade were to happen, how much they would miss Duncan Robinson though, just because of his off-ball movement, being a pest, just running around. That makes it 4 on 4, and then some, because you have one guy being attached to his hip the whole time. If you think
Right.
about the points he scored, it was catch and shoot threes and little slip cuts to the basket. Um, I feel like you don't have the stretch shooters around them. If you do that, then like Hawkes can create, Hero can create, Rozier can create. You already know what Jimmy and Bam can do, but I feel like you also need the set shooters around Jimmy, just because of the way Jimmy plays with post offense. Not saying the other guys can't be catch and shoot guys, but it just helps to have set role players rather than have a bunch of shot creators on the floor.
Yeah, yeah, you make good points. I think the thing that stuck out to me the most is the point you made about Jamie Jock Jr. And I think that's why I am comfortable getting rid of Martin, because I see that he can fill that role already.
Yeah,
And as far as Kyle Lowry goes, I agree. You just send him to the bench because he's going to be better in a bench seventh or eighth man off the guy, seventh or eighth man off the bench role anyway right now in his career, and just
yeah,
really leading that second unit. So I think Kyle Lowry is better fitted for that anyway. And then you look at Duncan Robinson. I think he's the most interesting part of this trade actually because he's the biggest variable. I think
yeah,
there are some points with his time with the Heat where people have looked at it and said there's a $22 million contract sitting on the bench for what? Why not just move him? And then there's other times where he's been like it's been Bam, Jimmy, and then Duncan Robinson as the like third most important player on the whole team. So
yeah.
I think it definitely is the biggest variable. It'd be interesting to see what really could pry Duncan Robinson away from Miami, and it would change the dynamic of their offense a lot, I think. But yeah, interesting trade. It'd be interesting to see what Terry Rozier could do in Miami and what the Martin brothers and Duncan Robinson would do for the Hornets. Because the other part you didn't really mention there is what does LaMelo Ball look like with a guy like Duncan Robinson running around being a pest? I
I
think that'd be
agree.
really interesting too.
The spacing's important, but they also don't even have a second superstar to pair with him yet. So that's the problem. So you can't really talk about the Hornets until they actually want to do a true rebuild. So that's
For
why I
sure.
don't talk about them much.
And last comment before you get into your next trade, then another thing I would say it's interesting then I guess too is if you're the Hornets, are you willing to trade away Terry Rozier for Duncan Robinson and Caleb Martin, or are you looking to try to get Terry Rozier packaged into that second superstar to pair with Lamelo Ball? Could you see a
True.
Terry Rozier and Zach LaVine swap? Wow, it's the first time I thought about that.
That's also very true, but I think they'll wait till the offseason to make a big move like that if they do at all. They tend to go for the draft. Like this past year, Brandon Miller's now sitting there. You have to wait for his development. So there's a lot going on in Charlotte, but
And the
not
Hornets,
enough to
they've
make
been
them
really
good.
good in the draft. The Hornets have been very good in the draft. It's worked well for them.
Yeah, we don't
Anyway,
talk about
Bender.
it.
Anyway,
Yeah,
Bender.
so let's move on to the next one. I actually have a three-team deal here. I have it being between the Lakers, Grizzlies, and the Bulls. So I want to start off by thinking about the Lakers' needs. Whenever you talk about a team trading for somebody, it's always because they have a deficiency somewhere. Um, the Lakers' problem is on defense and their three-point shooting, just like last year. Um, the one name that's been floated around to be traded is D'Angelo Russell. I feel like that's the only piece you can really trade because I feel like they won't part ways with Reeves after signing him this offseason.
Right.
And the only other name I can think of is maybe they trade Rui if it's for the right asking price. Um, but further ado, I have Marcus Smart and Aldama going to the Lakers. That gives you 3-point shooting, like stretch four, stretch three from Aldama to pair next to LeBron and Anthony Davis. Um, and then Marcus Smart gives you a point guard if you want to run him at point guard, even. But he can also stretch the floor for those guys as well. Um, that's basically what his role was with the Celtics and the way they ran their offense. He had no problem just being catch and shoot and being a dog on defense. I think he'd be a perfect fit for that team. And if you go back to the bubble years, Anthony Davis and LeBron James were the only two quote unquote like superstars on that team. I feel like there's no need to add D'Lo or keep D'Lo on the team anymore. I feel like you've ran that through long enough to know if it's going to work or not. I do like the young guys on that team, so uh, just feel like the Lakers should be better and they're not. So make a move. I also have Pat Williams and Caruso from the Bulls going to the Grizzlies. I think this helps as well because this will eventually help the Grizzlies' bench depth going into next season. Um, Pat Williams is only on a 1 year right now. Like this is last year of his deal. I think they could renew him and have him come off the bench with a guy like Brandon Clark who will be healthy. Um, and it's needless to say, I don't know what's going on with Steven Adams. I feel bad for him. He's always hurt every year as well.
Yeah.
Um, and Caruso, there's a lot you can say about Caruso. I feel like he's the same type of player as Marcus Smart as well. Um,
But
so I feel like you're not
time
losing
out.
anything.
Time out.
What?
You saying Caruso and Marcus Smart are the same player?
Same kind of player, yes. Defense, like to be a dog and disturb people and shoot the ball when you need to. Tell me I'm wrong.
Do you think one has more value than the other?
No,
Wow. So you
no,
so you
same value.
think so you think in the NBA a Marcus Smart for Alex Caruso straight up trade would happen,
I don't think it would happen just because you're not going to trade three and D for another three and D. That's just not how it works.
right? Because Marcus Smart is more valuable. Anyway, I
That is
do
no.
I
No,
do
no,
really
no.
like this trade. I really like the idea of Marcus Smart going to the Lakers, though.
Yes.
I like that a
And the
lot.
other part of that's actually I have D'Lo and Zaire Williams from the Grizzlies as well going to the Bulls. So I think D'Lo going to the Bulls fits their needs because they need a point guard with Lonzo being out. And if they
Yep.
still want to be competitors, they'll still have DeRozan for the rest of this year. Um, and Vucevic. And I think Drummond's actually in the starting lineup now ever since Vucevic went down. They're bringing
Yeah.
Vuce off the bench.
And talk about
So
a
yeah,
fit with DeRozan. D'Lo is an interesting one.
yeah. Yeah, I think it works. Um, I don't know. I feel like he's more of a playmaker than what Levine is. So I think it would just fit their system a little bit better, and they just don't have a playmaker. When you think about it, the Bulls were running on teams when Lonzo was healthy, and they originally put together that team of Vucevic and DeRozan and Levine like all through the offseason stuff. Um, it's unfortunate we couldn't see that team through with everything that happened, but I think
Yeah.
it still fits the same needs besides maybe Lonzo's defense. So, or Caruso's
Yeah.
defense, who's involved in this trade.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're accomplishing close to the same thing there by bringing in D'Lo, which is interesting, and it is really unfortunate. I'm still holding out for the idea that Lonzo could start playing in January,
Mhm.
and the Bulls team looked really good to end the season. I think that'd be awesome to see.
Yeah,
But all
one
right, oh, go
one
ahead.
quick thought though. I think if Lonzo came back, I think it would still be a decent way of doing things if you started D'Lo and Lonzo at the same time. I still think that's also a viable option. Um, D'Lo's played the two spot before, so I feel like it would fit just perfectly.
Yeah, I also think there's something to be said for the fact that Lonzo hasn't actually played NBA basketball in a decent bit. So if you just throw him back out
For
there and
sure.
expect him to be your point guard and run
For
the
sure.
offense, that's you're gonna have problems.
For sure.
All right, moving on to my third trade here. I have a three-team trade, and I have the Mavs acquiring Jarrett Allen from the Cavs. Mavs and Cavs trade. The third team in here is going to be the Wizards. So the Mavs are going to acquire Jarrett Allen from the Cavaliers. The Cavaliers are going to acquire Grant Williams and Tyus Jones and some cash exceptions, and then Seth Curry will end up on the Wizards, um, plus like probably a pick or two. So the reason I like this trade is because the Mavs need, I think, some more solidified center play, some more solidified forward play, some beef in there. And I think Jared Allen fits the age range of the timeline that they're shooting for, and has already had a little bit of that playoff experience. And I think history has shown Doncic and both Kyrie and Doncic do well with a rim running style center. So I think he fits everything that's going on in Dallas really well. I don't know that Grant Williams has really made the impact in Dallas that anyone expected him to this year. So I think letting go of him isn't that big of a deal. But sending him to a place like Cleveland could actually be a really good fit. I think they could use a more solidified wing with better spacing, who's a more consistent shooter, probably in Cleveland. As well as Tyus Jones, I think helps that team a lot with all of the injuries and shuffling around they've done at the point guard position this year. So you have another like depth piece there in Tyus Jones, and then the Wizards at this point, you don't really care what's happening to your team, but you pick up a pick. You look at the future a little bit. You bring in a sharpshooter in Seth Curry who can at least be a good locker room guy for you for the rest of the season. And then yeah, you pick up that pick or two. So I think this one works out for kind of everyone involved. Everyone kind of solves a need or looks towards the future. So yeah. What do you think about this one, better?
So my original thoughts was Lively's playing really good this year. Rookie for the Mavs. If you're talking about win now, there's no reason not to get better. So I'd have no problem with Lively coming off the bench with Jared Allen being there. That's where I think Siakam fits their team a little bit better as well. If you want to do that, I just feel
So
like
NBA
Siakam
just
makes
needs they need the NBA needs four more Siakams.
yes. I just feel like he fits almost any team that's wanting to go for a championship this year, which is tough. Um, but no, I think Lively's played good enough that you could get a four man rather than a center. But Jared Allen would be like your solidified experience and growth at that spot rather than waiting for what Lively's going to do. We already know Dwight Powell's not exactly that guy that wants to be in that starting spot. Not wants to be, just doesn't fit as well as some others.
And a little
Um,
undersized.
yeah, they're quite an interesting team. I feel like they still lack defense. The only defense that they really have is Grant Williams, and if you put him in that trade, you have no defense at the wing spot. Like Tim Hardaway doesn't play defense. Derek Jones plays defense, but like it's pure athleticism, um, and length.
Yeah,
Like Kyrie, Luca, like they get picked apart.
yeah,
They might
and
score 80 combined in a game, which go ahead and do that. You'll probably win. But I still think their need is more defensive wing 3-4 spot rather than a center. Um, my other thought is Tyus Jones being with the Cavs, I think is the biggest part of this just because of the shuffling that you said. Even going into next year, having him come off the bench would be nice as well, just because I feel like he's a step down from what a Darius Garland is, because Garland is a very good playmaker, so is Tyus Jones, but Garland's also a bucket. And that's where I think they differentiate themselves a little bit. Um, but we also saw what Rubio was doing with the Cavs team a year or two ago, like before he retired this year, obviously. And I think Tyus Jones also fits that mold. The Cavs play together. So I don't think that'd be a problem. The only thing I'm thinking about now for the Cavs with this trade is, do you have a problem with Evan Mobley playing center? Because they were playing him at the four spot for a while. I think he should be playing the five just to be a mobile guy against what's the NBA is like transforming into. Like you have Chet and Victor now. So I think
yeah,
he fits that mold rather than a standstill Jared Allen. But we'll kind of see what happens.
yeah. I think you do definitely move Mobley to the four in this situation, and I think Tyus Jones going to the Cavs is a big deal, but I think Grant Williams ending up on the Cavs is actually a big deal too. I know that they have Struess and a couple other guys there, but I think Grant Williams has a different level of like toughness to him that like I just don't know if he's making that much of a difference on the Mavericks. It feels like the impact is underwhelming there. But
For sure.
go ahead, Bender, on to your last trade here.
Yeah, so my very last one is a Sixers trade. Shocker. But it actually involves Siakam. So I have
Also,
Pascal
shocker.
Siakam. Hey, man. We've been alluding to it the whole time. Um, but I have Pascal Siakam and Gary Trent Jr. going to the Sixers. This is an exchange for Tobias Harris, Robert Covington, and KJ Martin. Um, Picks here and there. It all depends on what teams want and what they value certain players. Pascal, I feel like you would have to trade some picks if you're the Sixers along with those guys, just because Tobias Harris's contract is up after this year. So it's a rental more than anything. So I think this makes the Raptors better. You get a young defensive wing in KJ Martin, and Raptors love their defensive wings. They still are fighting for that for bench depth, even after the RJ Barrett trade. Um, and then Tobias Harris, like he's been playing well for the Sixers. I just think him being on the Raptors for a year could be more of like a guidance for RJ Barrett. RJ's been playing well ever since he got traded to the Raptors, but I think it would just be good to have a veteran around him. There's actually a report that I saw that was actually quite interesting right before this podcast. Um, some inside source from the Knicks mentioned that the Knicks traded away all three of their softies from last season. And he meant Emmanuel Quickly, RJ Barrett, and Obi Toppin. And Obi Toppin obviously went to the Pacers. So I think that's kind of interesting that you have an inside source talking trash about players that carried your team for the last couple of years, or at least had a big part of your team. So I think there's something to be said about professionalism in the NBA as well. But I think Gary Trent also helps us as well. D'Anthony Melton and him off either the bench or starting lineup. would be great just because Gary Trent brings more defense to our team. Um, and I think familiarity has a big deal with a lot of things, like right into Nick Nurse's offense. They're used to it. You wouldn't have to be like, let's take a week to practice and figure out the offense. No, I think they'd fill right in. Pascal Siakam and Joel Embiid are good friends, so that fits as well. Um, so if they have to figure out anything, they'll figure it out rather than like James Harden having beef with Embiid or Maxey or whoever anymore. Nobody knows. James Harden has beef with whatever team can't carry him to a championship. Um, so I just think it fits for both teams.
Yeah, I think the familiarity with Nick Nurse is a really good point of emphasis here. Obviously, Siakam and Gary Trent Jr. have a lot of familiarity with Nick Nurse and those systems and everything, so I think that makes sense. The part about Joel Embiid and Siakam being friends as well, right from Cameroon, I think that makes a really big difference. The softies comment coming out of New York is really interesting. I wonder what insiders kind of thinking about that, and I think it opens up the idea that the Knicks are going to have to go prove it then, right? Is if
Hmm.
you feel like you got rid of the players that were dragging down the culture or not being as mentally tough as the rest of the team or whatever it was, now you got to go out and perform. Because in my opinion, if I was going to look at anyone on that Knicks roster that's not mentally tough, I'm looking directly at Julius Randle.
Hmm.
I'm looking
Who's
directly
also
at
on the
Julius
trading
Randle.
block, by the way. They mentioned that the other day. He is
Right.
open for trading.
So maybe there's a fourth softie in New York. But overall, I do think I like this trade. It's interesting that, Tobias would be sort of a rental for the Raptors. I think that he would do a good job of sort of stabilizing a young group of guys up there. But at the same time, I feel like Siakam's and Tobias's value shouldn't be that different. And it feels
Mm.
like in that trade, Siakam's value is higher. And that I guess that'd be my only point of contention is like feel like Tobias isn't that much less valuable than Siakam is, but
I think
either
you have a
way,
good
would probably
point,
still
but
do the trade.
yeah, I think you have a good point, but I think it's more about how the league views it. And Pascal's talked about a lot more than Tobias. Tobias
Yep.
tries on defense, but Siakam's known for his defense as well.
Yeah, I mean, plus the age and the contracts and all those kinds of things get considered in. Plus, I think Gary Trent Jr. a lot younger. KJ Martin's the youngest guy in that deal, but Gary Trent Jr. is stepping on the court. And he's going to be a rotation guy for us, whereas Covington and KJ Martin are not right now. So I think that makes a difference too. But all right, I'm going to jump into my last trade here. I have a three-team trade between the Bucks, the Warriors, and the Hawks. So I have the Hawks acquiring Pat Connaughton and Jonathan Kuminga. So they take Pat Connaughton from the Bucks, and they get Jonathan Kuminga from the Warriors. I have DeJounte Murray, Bobby Portis, and Marjan Beauchamp going to the Warriors. So Bobby Portis and Beauchamp from the Bucks, and DeJounte Murray from the Hawks going to the Warriors. And then I have Wiggins and Wes Matthews going back to the Bucks, plus some cash considerations.
Hmm.
So this is like kind of a blockbuster trade because you have the Warriors sending out Kuminga and Wiggins, getting rid of both of them in one trade. But they're sending out Kuminga and Wiggins to bring in DeJounte Murray and Bobby Portis, along with Beauchamp, who I think Murray and Bobby Portis are better fits with who the Warriors are currently
I agree.
and where else they can fit their roster. I think the Bucks get excited about bringing in Wiggins and bringing back Wes Matthews.
Hmm.
And I think if you're the Hawks, you get Pat Connaughton and you get Kuminga for DeJounte Murray and
I
Wes
think this is
Matthews,
interesting.
which feels like a win for everyone. I
Yeah,
think I think this is something that could actually happen in terms of like this is a win for everyone. You put this in the trade finder and it pops out, everyone gets more wins.
yeah. I like that trade a lot. So for one, I think Kaminga having a new environment helps. I think he's better than what Steve Kerr thinks he is at this moment. The other part of this is that I think the Milwaukee Bucks are kind of regretting the Damian Lillard trade right now. They don't have a lot of defense on their team outside of Giannis and Brook Lopez. They've gotten exposed in a lot of games. I feel like teams are picking on Dame even more than they already were.
Yep.
Um, so adding Wiggins as a defensive wing helps. It's not your guard defense, but it's at least some kind of defense on that team that's added because Pat
You bring
Connaughton
back
doesn't
Wes
play
Matthews
defense.
too. You bring back
Yeah,
Wes Matthews too. Wes Matthews can play the same role as Pat Connaughton, but will play defense.
yeah. So it's 3 and D, and that's like no problem there. At least that's familiarity as well.
Hmm.
But it's also a good thing for the Warriors. Feels like Wiggins got lazy after um, winning a championship with them again. So I think Wiggins kind of like backtracked to his Minnesota days, and I think they're kind of seeing that. And they're going to give him the boot here soon. But um, DeJounte Murray adds energy and defense from the guard perspective as well for the Warriors, and Bobby Portis adds bench scoring, and that seems to be a problem as well. It also gives them a backup center if they want to play him at center. Um,
Some depth
so
in terms of big guys. You know, they don't have to play Draymond at five. You know,
yeah,
second
so
liner.
I think it's a great fit. I think it'd be a different fit for them just because they're not used to stretch fives.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if you had DeJounte Murray, you're gonna have all shooters around him and Draymond. So I think it's a great fit all the way around and good new starts for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is you know, we've had a lot of fun doing this. We took a good bit of time today to go into the trade finder and actually work out the contracts and make sure that all these things were legit. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Make sure to like and subscribe on the YouTube. Make sure you like on the Spotify as well. Check us out on Twitter at stands_life and TikTok as well at life in the stands. Bender, anything else?
No, that'll be it. We just thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you.